Hello, everyone. What's going on? And welcome to episode 7 of Beyond the Bell Tower. My name is Josh Wright, and I'm your host, and we're excited to be here once again today talking with Miss Rachael Mathis, who is a graduate student here at NC State. So, Rachel, could you get into a little bit about who you are and what you study here?
Yeah, definitely. So, first of all, thanks so much for having me, Josh. I'm honored to be featured on this podcast. As you said, I'm a candidate in higher education administration program. So, I'm a second year, about to graduate in May. So, I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah.
I'm from a really small rural town in Western North Carolina. So I always say I'm an hour west of Asheville, because a lot of people in the Raleigh area aren't familiar with Western North Carolina, but it's a small town called Franklin, North Carolina.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. So one interesting thing about Rachel is, along with a lot of other trio students, is that she is a first generation college student. So could you tell us a little bit about your experience as a first generation college student and what that was like? Were there any fears that you had going into college because of that? Could you explain a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so being a first gen college student, where to start with that? So I actually didn't know I was a first gen college student until I was a senior in college, actually. And when I went to apply to graduate, so I was really late. Um, the graduation application form said like to mention a few accolades about yourself, and it had first generation college student on there, and it kind of said if your parents didn't go to college. And so seeing that, I was the first time it kind of dawned on me, like, yeah, my parents, they didn't pursue higher education. That's not taking away from what they do at all, but it's just they didn't go to college. And so that was the first time that, I really even kind of identified myself as a first generation college student. And actually, it was comforting to know that, my 4 years, I didn't kind of have that mentorship, and it kind of dawned on me right there in my final moments as an undergraduate student. So I think, it would have been helpful to know earlier on, but it's just kind of one of those things that if you haven't heard it mentioned before, like you don't know what you don't know,
Right.
if
Right.
that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Did you have any siblings that had gone through the process, or were you the first?
Yeah, Yeah, so I was the very first. So I have an older brother. He went straight to the Marines right out of high school. And so our paths looked totally different as well. So I didn't really have anyone to kind of rely on like, application process and that kind of thing. It was more so, my friends were applying for college in high school, and I thought, I should do that as well. And actually, the messaging from my parents, they really did push me to go to college. I think, in their generation, it is looked at to be successful, like you need a 4 year degree. And so they really wanted that for me. So they really did support and encourage me to apply for college. And I can really commend them for that because they were going through it with me. They had no idea kind of where to start. We had one guidance counselor to serve my whole high school. So my high school was relatively small. We had about 1,000 students in Western North Carolina. Um, and so, yeah, we had one guidance counselor. And so she was the only one that really kind of helped me navigate that process. She was obviously stretched thin with all the senior class coming to her. So she was helpful when I was able to meet with her. But yeah, I didn't really have anybody to lean on or kind of help me through the process.
Right, right. And it's funny, you mentioned how small your high school is.
Mhm.
I'm the same way. I come from a really small high school in Durham, North Carolina. I graduated with 95 other people. And
Wow, that is smaller than mine.
yeah. And there's about 100 people per grade. It's a K-12, it's a
Okay.
charter school, but for the high school, there's
Okay.
about 400 kids in the school itself.
Wow.
So I definitely know what you mean coming from that smaller school environment. You mentioned earlier that your parents kind of drove you from the beginning
Mhm.
to go after a college degree. And so with that,
Yeah,
and we'll talk a little bit more about what you study later, but did you have
absolutely.
any idea of what you wanted to be or what kind of degree that you wanted to get when you were in high school transitioning into college?
Yeah. So I can kind of go in, like you said, we'll go into my major and that kind, but on the back end story, we did a few questionnaires when I was a junior in high school about fill this out if these are skills that you would be good at. And kind of the messaging and mindset, that I heard from my guidance counselors, from my parents, was you go to college for 4 years to be a doctor, a lawyer, a veterinarian, that kind of thing. You go to college to get paid money, and then you'll have a very successful and fulfilling life. And so that was the kind of ideas I had, was I'm going to go to college. I loved animals. That was really the only reasoning why I thought, great, I will be a veterinarian. I love animals. It's a job that was seen as successful in my small town. We had very many animal hospitals there. And so my family, my dad, I remember he drove me to like different veterinarian hospitals to get me in the door. He had networks from the local church we went to. And so he introduced me at church to the local veterinarian. I was able to watch some surgeries when I was in high school and really figure out if like that's what I wanted. And I think, I always kind of knew I didn't love it, but I thought, this is what people do for jobs. And to get a job, you don't have to be necessarily passionate about it. But I thought I love helping animals and that kind of thing. So my parents did push me in the way that they knew how, of like, yeah, okay, you want to be a veterinarian, we'll get you in the door to like shadow and volunteer. And that really, did set me up to, and learned now like kind of transferable skills, like how to network. I was able to put that stuff on my resume. But again, I was kind of just starting from the ground up. Like I had no idea what I was doing. I was just connecting with local people in the area. But that was, my thought. I was going to go to college to be a veterinarian. So that was my original plan.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a valuable experience, being able to network with people in your community and those connections that
Yeah,
you had even before school started. So that sounds good.
absolutely.
When it came to applying, to college, of course, you're the first one to do it. What was that process like? The
Yeah.
FAFSA, learning about
Yeah.
tours and things like that. How did you go about that?
Oh, yeah.
Decided where you for
Yeah.
first one.
So the reason I laugh is because this process was a little bit painful. Me and my mom were there. She was getting frustrated at me because I lost the FAFSA password that was sent to her email, and then she didn't have the email password, and it was my fault. So
Yeah.
like it was a lot. It was really difficult to navigate that because I was frustrated, but I'm sure she was also frustrated because she had no idea what we were filling out. But we kind of took it on together. So yeah, it was a lengthy process. I didn't know about the Common App, so this is something I know about now working in higher education, but I was sitting down applying to different universities. I only applied to universities in North Carolina
Mhm.
because that's just what I thought I should do. I didn't even think about applying anywhere else. I just applied for University of North Carolina, $75 application fee every time. And looking back now, maybe I could have gotten assistance with that application fee, but I just applied for a few select schools because it was A, expensive,
Right.
B, I didn't know about tools of like the Common App or that kind of thing. And see, yeah, it was just me and my mom navigating through all this like difficult information and documentation, like how am I going to pay for school? And then, when I was granted FAFSA loans, do I take like which loan to take? And that was something that I ultimately learned the hard way. I accepted loans. The subsidized loan, that's the word I was looking for. So how you're not supposed to accept a certain loan versus the other. These were things like I didn't know. I was just granted money, and not really understanding that process of like paying it back was frustrating in hindsight. But if it was going to get me to school, it was something that I was willing to do.
Okay. Yeah. And so looking back on your experience applying to school, and now looking where you are now within higher
Mhm.
education administration, what would you kind
Mhm.
of tell yourself then about some of the things that you've learned now in terms of application processes and things like
Mhm.
that?
So many things.
Yeah.
Obviously I've gained the knowledge through kind of navigating it through it once. But I would look back, I think I did the best I could at the time with the resources and the mentorship that I had. But now I know that I can reach out to different offices, in my community, applying for different scholarships. My mom was in the military. I now know about scholarships for children of parents that were in the military that would give you money that you wouldn't have to pay back in order to graduate. So just knowing kind of doing a little bit more research, the Common App. So I could, fill out an application once to send to many different schools. Also, one really cool thing NC State does is you can enter to exploratory studies. I didn't realize that when I was applying to school. So in my mind, I was just going for biology. I was going to be a vet. I think it would have been really beneficial for me to kind of take some of those introductory courses where I learned about different things to kind of find my passion that way. But I think I just had the messages sent to me so early on was like I needed to go to school to make more money, and then I was going to have a successful life. And so that's ultimately why I started the route I started. But obviously I took a few turns and I'm here today. So yeah, I would go back, I definitely commend myself for making it kind of this far, navigating through systems that aren't clear. And yeah, I would just definitely reach out to, I have networks now, I have a little bit more information. So that's what I would kind of have told myself when I was starting all this.
Yeah.
And that's, what I really, I put myself in the shoes of the students I'm advising as well. And I know we'll dive kind of more into that, but it helps to have a firsthand experience. Yeah.
Yep, definitely understand that.
Yeah.
So fast forward, you graduate high school and you decide on going to UNCG. So why
Yes.
UNC Greensboro? What stood out?
Yeah. So again, just applied to a handful of schools in North Carolina. And so my process of elimination was kind of random. I applied to UNCW. It was like 8 hours from home. I was like, that's too far. I applied to Western. That was 30 minutes from my high school. So that one was too close. I knew that I wanted to kind of branch out. A lot of classmates went to Western, and so I knew that I wanted a different experience. I applied to UNC Charlotte. It was like a family member that said like traffic is horrible in Charlotte. And so like just that small comment like deferred me away. I actually didn't do any campus tours. I got into the Lloyd International Honors College at UNCG. And so that gave you a scholarship to study abroad. So that wasn't even really an idea until, it was listed on the website. I had, I think my GPA was like a 3.8, 4.0. And so I was like, oh, I will apply for the honors college and see if I get in. And so I did. And that kind of really unfolded from there. But UNCG was only on my radar because my brother's girlfriend at the time was going there. So it's, that kind of like being from a small town, you only know something if like somebody else did it. So that's kind of how I landed on UNCG. Again, I didn't do any college tours. I just went to the freshman orientation session in that summer, and I believe it was called SOAR. I went with another classmate from my small hometown, so we just got in the car, drove there, stayed overnight, and kind of just made my decision of this is where I'm going to college. Yeah.
Nice. And so when you got there, what did you decide to major in?
Yep. So it was biology, like in my head, I was going to be a vet. And actually, kind of ironic, where I really wanted to go to college was NC State. And when I applied to NC State, I just got on the waiting list. And so I knew that NC State was a college that I should go to if I wanted to be a vet. They have a great veterinary school here. But I got on the wait list, and then by the time it was due to like pay all your dues, I had already paid for UNCG.
Okay.
So it's just kind of a full circle looking back. Like I ended up at NC State anyways, but that was my original plan. And so, yeah, I decided it's okay. I'll take a pivot. I will go to UNCG. My classmate was also majoring in biology. She wanted to be a pharmacist. So it was really helpful that I had like a classmate that was also going that was also going to major in biology. So we were kind of just navigating that together. And ultimately, I was from, the mountains. I spent the majority of my childhood playing like in the outdoors. So to me, biology just made the most sense. And I didn't know about a lot of majors, majoring in business in my mind thought you were going to be locked to a computer your whole life.
Right.
I didn't even know probably what an engineer did and that would be an option. So biology was just kind of the only one that made sense. Again, that mindset, if you are going to college, you should be a doctor, a vet, that kind of thing. So that's how I landed on BAM biology.
Okay. Okay. And so your first study abroad experience you mentioned was at
Mhm.
UNCG within the Honors College,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, cool. And so what part of the Honors College would you say you enjoyed the most? Was it the study abroad or was it another aspect of the Lloyd
Yeah.
International Honors College? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I actually didn't finish the honors college. So I
Oh,
originally
okay.
started off there. Yeah, you had to have a certain GPA to finish. I quickly became overwhelmed my first semester. I did take a really cool introductory class. It was kind of like, I want to call it like a freshman seminar. And that was where we were talking about different cultures and different people that would be at UNCG. UNCG is a minority serving institute.
Yeah.
So every day I was surrounded by diversity and I was really grateful for that looking back. But a lot of times, I was out of my comfort zone. I had been in a small bubble my whole life. So definitely the Lloyd International Honors College kind of pushed me immediately to start getting myself out of my comfort zone. And then actually, so you got a scholarship to study abroad. So I started pretty early, through this freshman seminar, they really talked about studying abroad. And so my minor was in Spanish. And so in one of my classes, my introductory Spanish courses, the professor said, we are going to Spain this summer, Madrid. You should definitely sign up, especially if you want a minor in Spanish. It was a good way to get like 9 credits. The summer of my freshman year. So I thought, oh my gosh, like, why not? And then that scholarship from the Lloyd International Honors College, what really helped me to financially support myself when I was there. So that was kind of the initial reasoning. I had that freshman seminar class. I knew I needed to study abroad to complete the Lloyd International Honors College. Which again, I didn't. I ended up dropping my sophomore year. But that was the initial reasoning. Was I was in class, the information was kind of just publicized to me in class. I think that was really helpful rather than like receiving an email. Like it was word of mouth. It was like from a professor. And then one of the professors, they were from Spain. And so I just felt comfortable enrolling in that experience, knowing that I was going to be with professors that were from the area and that kind of thing.
Okay. And so you mentioned that you were able to go and study abroad as a freshman or after your freshman year. So we'll
Yes.
get into study abroad a little bit later, but what was that
Yeah.
initial excitement like knowing that, you're the first in your family to go to college and now, for the summer, you'll be able to study in Spain. What was that like and how long were you there?
Yeah, no, it was a lot. I was super excited. My family was super excited for me as well. Obviously, rightfully so nervous.
Yeah.
I had never been on a plane.
Okay.
My mom had been out of the country once, but my dad never been outside the country, never been on a plane as well, doesn't have a passport. So it was a lot of emotions all at once. Again, I was one of those students that waited till the last minute to get a passport. So then I had to expedite it because again, you don't really know what you don't know. And so I didn't really have anyone to help me through that experience as well. So it was a lot of emotions. Obviously, it was excitement. I was, going outside of the country, but I was also really nervous. I had never been to a big city. And so not only was I going to a big city outside the US, I was going to Madrid, Spain, where they don't speak the language. So It was a lot, but it was a 5-week study abroad program where we stayed with a host family. So I stayed with a host mother with 5 other girls that were from UNCG. And I think just knowing that I was going to be with people that kind of really helped get me out of my comfort zone a little bit. But yeah, it was a lot. When I landed in Madrid, I felt like I had entered like another world. It was a lot to take in, but it was exciting. It was nerve-wracking. I was feeling all the emotions for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, I'm sure. Especially, it sounds like you weren't able to, necessarily travel much when you were younger, but now as
Yeah.
a freshman in college or, rising sophomore, you're living with another family in another country. So
Yeah,
I'm sure that was exciting but nerve-wracking at the same time. Just
definitely was.
accommodating to a different type of life and everything. Yeah.
Absolutely. Seeing what was out there in the world that I had no idea.
So let's get into a little bit of how you got into, education and especially from where you grew up. Was there
Mhm.
anything from your background or from your upbringing that inspired you to go after a degree in higher education?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because honestly, I can say no. I didn't even know that um, a master's of higher education administration was even a path. Like I didn't know you could get that. I didn't know you
Right.
could get your master's in that. Um, and so I think we'll touch on this a little bit later on. But my first job, kind of right out of college, after I had taught English abroad, was to be an assistant international student advisor. And so really that first entry level job into the field of education was what inspired me, looking at the stepping ladder of how do you move up in this field? How do I move up in a field that, I haven't prepared for? Was the reason that I started to looking into these different master's programs. And then ultimately, when I started my first entry level job, it was 2019, December 2019, 3 months after that, COVID hit,
Right.
everything went online. And so, I was starting my professional journey, and then I felt like my professional development was getting hindered because, I was navigating working in a remote environment.
Yeah.
My Wi-Fi growing up wasn't always great.
Yeah.
So it was new for me. And so I think that is how my journey has taken a lot of turns, but ultimately where I ended up here was honestly by every setback I had, I think I figured out a way to pivot. And I think a lot of times being a first generation college student, that is something, you hear first gens are resilient and that kind of thing. And I think it's because me being a first generation college student, we have to figure out how to navigate these difficult experiences that we have never really been through before. So yeah, nothing, when I was 10 years old, I wasn't like, I'm gonna do my master's in higher education administration. I think, if I were to tell my 16-year-old self right now that I have traveled every year since I originally went abroad in 2015 on that faculty-led trip. That's what ultimately changed the trajectory of my life, was just going on that one study abroad trip, because then it kind of sparked my passion for travel and I couldn't get enough of it.
Okay. And so you mentioned a little bit of navigating through, life changes, especially as a young professional. You
Mhm.
mentioned that COVID pretty much hit like your first year as a professional. And so can you talk about how navigating those changes has kind of how would you say it's helped you as a future professional in the field and as a future advisor to, students?
Yeah, definitely. So I think just learning how to pivot quickly, again, that comes with being a first gen. There was many times where I had to get in my car, being from a rural area, Walmart was 30 minutes down the road. So we didn't have cell service really. We had Wi-Fi. So I would have to get in my car to drive 15 minutes, park on the side of the road to take a phone interview. One of my many jobs I did, I worked in Apple. in Greensboro when I went to UNCG. And I remember that interview, being at home, I had to drive and I took that interview in a car. And so those were experiences that, didn't really stick out to me then. But now even leading trips, my last program that I led abroad was 54 business students to Sevilla, Spain, this past summer. And so navigating challenges for me, it kind of comes innately. Like, I think having that first gen mindset, it's something I've had to do being from a small rural area that didn't have a lot of resources. Going to UNCG, being pushed out of my comfort zone, and then studying abroad is the growth that you have studying abroad, taking trains, taking plane flights by yourself, figuring out what to do if your phone dies, how to ask people around you for help. So I think that's where I learned a lot of those skills that have ultimately helped me in my professional life. And for me, it's really leaning on others and asking for help. I would say that's something I didn't know as a freshman entering UNC Greensboro. If I would have asked my advisor, a little bit more questions, told them my parents didn't go to school, maybe I would have a little bit more of that information. So I always encourage my students that I'm advising, ask for help. And then that's what I'm here for, to give students those resources. And then also to navigate, as they study abroad, different things such as money. And I think we'll get into that a little bit later on.
Yeah. Yeah. And really quickly, I'm glad you mentioned, some of those things that you went through growing up and your interviewing processes. You and I were both from North Carolina, but I grew up in
Mhm.
Durham. And that's not
Yeah.
really something I've ever had to think about, pulling over
Yeah.
to take an interview because of reception and Wi-Fi. I've never
Yeah.
really had to think about that. So it kind of explains how different people come from such different journeys and how, they can bring it all together and still get to where they want to go to. I think that's admirable. So I'm really glad you mentioned
Absolutely.
that. Growing up in a rural environment,
Mhm.
were there any things that you noticed that might have held other people back or made it difficult for them to advance in their life or chase a different lifestyle?
Yeah. Yeah, and I say, being from a rural environment, there's a lot of great things associated with that. The strong community that you build there, I was in class with many of my classmates that had teachers that taught their parents. That is
Oh, okay.
a really unique bond in the sense of community that you can have growing up in a rural environment. Was honestly inspiring to me. And so I think, yeah, definitely different lifestyle. Everything is slower pace there. It's that, 30 minutes to Walmart, you go to town once, and once you're in town, you need to get everything done. And then once you're at home, you're not going out again, kind of thing. So I think, it is just a difference in lifestyle. It's a slower pace lifestyle, not to say that one is better than the other. I just knew for my life and my goals that I wanted to maybe a little faster pace of a lifestyle. I wanted a different path than maybe people in my town had. Not to say one's right or one's wrong, but I think it goes, who you surround yourself with um, really makes a difference. And ultimately, I said this previously, and this is a quote that I love, is you don't know what you don't know. And so for me, studying abroad was really that mind altering and opening experience that not a lot of people from my hometown, they get to have that. And so that is something that's why I'm ultimately in the field that I am in, because for me, that was the experience that, I was surrounded by classmates, international classmates that was asking me about, my morals and my beliefs and my religion. And it was the first time that I really had to critically think on my own, why I believed the certain things that I believed. And not just looking at it through the lens of my parents. I was really gaining my own lens, um, if that helps.
Yeah. Yeah, that was great. And so now I really want to move into more specifically your experience of, studying abroad and now what you do
Mhm.
now at NC State. in your role for being the advisor for the study abroad students.
Yeah.
Could you talk about what some of your responsibilities are currently as the coordinator for the study abroad summer programs that you lead?
Yeah, definitely. So first and foremost, I'm an advisor. So really just getting students in the door. We go into different classrooms, we advertise that we are here. I think one of the unique things about the Poole College of Management, we are one of the only colleges on campus that have our own global programs team. And so we work really closely with the study abroad office, but we do have that more one-on-one tailored experience with the Poole College of Management students. So first and foremost, my job is to let students know that we are here and we want to help you. I love sitting down with freshmen and they have no idea where they want to go and they have no idea what they want to do. And those are some of my favorite appointments because ultimately I help them plan out this possibility, and then we really incorporate it to, okay, we will make your classes work abroad. We put it back on them for more of the fun part, like where could you see yourself living and working, and kind of letting them know that it is a reality. Like no matter your background, if you're first gen, if you're from a rural area, that this is a possibility. And then, really using my own experience, I also studied abroad a second time in Australia.
Wow.
And, for me, I was there for 6 months and money was at the top of my priority list. And so, navigating that, I worked in a local gym in Australia to support myself studying abroad. So just giving students, resources, not saying like, oh, here, go on any program you want, but really genuinely having a conversation. So how are you going to budget when you're abroad and that kind of thing? So that's first and foremost is, letting students know that we're here. And then also letting them know that if you're a transfer student, if you're from a different background, like we will help you plan study abroad and make it a reality. And then the programs that I leave, we are facilitating and working with, international partners. So right now I am planning 5 programs, one in Australia, one in Italy, one in Brazil, and one in Munich, Germany, and then one in Switzerland. So in a week, I'm actually about to go to Switzerland with MBA
Wow.
students to lead a trip, a study abroad program. And we're going to go to the UN. And so this is like a really awesome and exciting experience. And so just letting students know that, listen, I'm from a small town, I'm first gen, and like you can do it too. And so that's a little bit of my responsibilities, but mostly just my passion for why I do what I do.
That's a great answer. What really stood out is kind of how you mentioned you play a role even on the transfer students that come in
Mhm.
to NC State. And that stands out to me because I'm a transfer student. I transferred
Mhm.
in my
Awesome.
sophomore year. And so I kind of
Mhm.
know what it's like. This is a huge university, a lot
Yeah,
of different resources, but there's a lot to navigate about it in order to access everything that
absolutely.
you can fully do with it. And so I know a little bit
Absolutely.
about being curious or having questions about what to do, who to see. If I'm interested in
Yeah,
this, who do I go and talk to? And so I see your role as an advisor for them. That's really important. Definitely.
absolutely. Because, for our transfer students, a lot of times they come in with the mindset like, I'm already behind. This is
Yeah.
not something that I'm able to do. And a lot of times, if you were to go on a summer study abroad program and get 9 credits in the summer, like a lot of times that'll put not only keep you on track, but put students ahead. And so I think, breaking that mindset and that barrier of kind of if you're a transfer student, you can't study abroad, but we're here to tell you you can and like you should. And definitely, I think, being a transfer student coming into a huge institution where you
Yeah.
already don't know, you feel behind and you don't know the resources. We have many transfer students and many that go abroad, and they're really happy that they did.
Yeah. Okay. And so you mentioned earlier, of course, that you studied in Spain, your first experience
Mhm.
study abroad, and then
Mhm.
you were also able to go and study in Australia. And then
Yes.
next week you're going to Switzerland. And so can you
Yes.
talk about some of the comparisons that you were able to make when you first studied in Spain to your
Mhm.
experience in Australia? What were some things that you noticed that were similar? Was there anything that different that you experienced?
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. So two very different cultures. I was in Madrid, so Spain, they stay out super late, the
Right.
food, the language for first and foremost. It was, even getting a coffee was kind of a barrier because I was super insecure about my accent, when I was trying to speak Spanish. So going to Australia in that respect was a little bit easier. And I think originally what kind of drew me to Australia for the 6 months. Um, and then also knowing that going to an English speaking country like Australia, that I could work there and support myself. And so those were a little bit of the reasons. But yeah, totally different countries, both amazing countries. And then ultimately, I really want to talk about the people that I met. Because each time you meet people from around the world, and I still keep in touch with people that I studied abroad with, for the 5 week session in Madrid, Spain. And then also I have a really great friends that were international students that I met in Australia. And so making those connections has really allowed me to travel more. And so I say that because a lot of times, it's hard to know like where to start, like going abroad. I have many people from my hometown that message me and, they're wanting to travel and they don't know where to start. And I think it is difficult. If I sat down and went to a country that I've never been to, it would be even difficult for me. And so for me, having those friendships, after I left Australia, I was able to, in the summer of 2017, I then went to the Netherlands to visit a friend that I had met in Australia, stayed there
Nice.
for 2 months. And
Oh,
so that was me getting an inside look at like, okay, what does a traditional family in the Netherlands look like?
yeah.
So I was really getting that like inside scoop of everyday today life, not necessarily like being a tourist. And then when I was in the Netherlands, like I made connections there. And so I had been able to travel every summer since 2015 from the connections that I've made, except for 2020.
Yeah.
COVID, unfortunately, I wasn't able to travel.
Broke the streak. Yeah.
But really from those, yeah, from those connections. And I think that is like another reason why I'm just such an advocate for studying abroad, because those relationships that you form all around the world. And then now that I've made, studying abroad in a way, essentially part of my job, when I'm going and leading these programs, I'm also making more and more connections. Last summer, I did an internship in Italy. So I went straight from working in Spain to doing an internship in Italy. And it was from those connections that I made through my graduate assistantship. So I think for me, it's like being from a small town, not knowing where to start. Studying abroad was like the starting point for me that kind of ultimately keeps unraveling and like leading to more and more people and more meeting more and more people and friends and going to visit them. I've had many international friends come here to visit me as well. So I think it can be very difficult to start. And for me, it was just those friendships that I made that's led me to do all this traveling as
Yeah.
well, and then incorporating it in, work.
Yeah. It's crazy to think about how all the connections you make while
I
you're
know.
abroad, it's led you to even, travel more places and experience more places,
Yeah,
because you hear that from college students here, in the
you
US.
do.
They go to these different state schools, maybe that are different from where they
Yep,
grew up. And, they have a friend from here and
absolutely.
a friend from there. So now they get to go there. But your experience
Exa-
is like doing that same thing, but except you're overseas. And so now you get to see even more
exactly.
places. So that's cool.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's kind of funny. I was joking with one of my friends because she's like, you've been so many places internationally, but she has traveled so many places in the US. And it was because she went to a very international or diverse college campus. And so she met many friends from across the US. So, and I admittedly haven't been traveled a lot in the US, which is kind of ironic. But
Wow.
yeah, exactly to your point. It's really like who you know. I probably would have never went to the Netherlands if I didn't have friends that I made there. Um, so yeah,
Well, that's funny.
definitely.
I've traveled a good amount here in the not a ton, but I've seen a few different states. So I'm happy to give you one of my states, one of your countries. How about
Yeah,
that?
I'll give you a country
Yeah,
and we
that's
can
great.
do a trade-off for
That'll
sure.
be cool. That'll be cool.
Yeah.
And so can you talk a little bit about your experience, you've already mentioned that you were a student studying in Spain, but you were also a teacher studying there. So you taught English. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like and the impact that you might have had on the students?
Definitely. Yeah. Wow. So I'll just kind of start from graduating college. So
Mhm.
yeah, UNCG, it was kind of in my senior year that I realized I didn't love biology. And I would say I had midlife was, I was 18, but had a midlife crisis of I've just worked this hard for 4 years. I've put a lot of money, loans into this, and I don't want to do biology.
Mhm.
So right after I graduated, I had an internship class my senior year, and I interned at a vet. And so ultimately, they hired me on. After that, I was making $9 an hour working at a vet with a biology degree.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I just want to be like very transparent in my experience. So I worked there for about 8 months. And those 8 months were really like a pivotal point in my life. I was working there. Yeah, I just graduated college, wasn't making a lot of money. My student loans were about to hit where I was about to have to start repaying them. And in my head, I just thought there's got to be more to life. And I was really doing some soul searching in that 8 months. I kind of had decided that I didn't want to be a vet. And that was a little bit heartbreaking, even to me, to come to that realization because it's something that I had put so much time and energy
Right.
into. And then I ultimately didn't want to let my family down.
Mhm.
And so I think it was a little bit confronting, but when I was reflecting back on my experiences I had at UNCG, the studying abroad was just the experiences that always kept highlighting me in my mind. They say 2016 was the best year ever. That was the year I was in Australia. So that was,
It was a good
that was
year.
what I knew yeah, 2016. I don't know what it was,
I don't
but
know, but it
it
just
will
was.
never
I
be
remember.
tapped.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. And so yeah, I knew that just traveling, meeting new people, like that is what I love to do. And so I did get, what sparked my interest was how could I then turn what I love to do into a job? And I actually had a really awesome study abroad advisor at UNC Greensboro. His name was Tom. He was great. I really relied on him. I reached out to him. I asked him for, I think we got a coffee and he told me just about his experience. He did a master's at UNCG that ultimately led him to be a study abroad advisor. He studied abroad in Iceland. And so it was just like humanizing his journey and like that connection. And so that I saw his job as something that I would really love to do. And so I asked him, where do I start with this? I'm graduating, I don't know what I want to do. And so he recommended teaching English. And so I did some research. I found a program that was based in Barcelona. It was, back to Spain. I loved studying abroad there. So I thought, I've heard all great things about Barcelona.
Mhm.
So I booked a 1 month course. It was like €1,000. So I saved up that money working at a vet because I thought, English is my first language, but I have no idea how to teach it. So I
Right.
knew that I needed like a course on that. So it
Right.
was a 1 month course in Barcelona, and I bought a one-way plane ticket. And I just, went, and I thought, the worst thing that could happen is I would come home. And so I went, I had like $4,000 saved in my bank account, a one-way plane ticket to Barcelona. Um, and that experience like was really hard for me because I didn't know what the next steps were. I didn't have a plan. I went from biology being what I thought was my end goal to now I'm teaching English abroad in a foreign country. And I really felt that imposter syndrome with what am I doing? But ultimately, that experience again led me to what I'm doing now. Um, and so yeah, it was a great experience. I was able to make connections. This summer after Switzerland, I'm leading a program to Australia. I'm meeting up with a friend that I met teaching English in Barcelona. She was from Australia. So again, back to that connection piece. And then ultimately, the students I was teaching, were more business professionals. So I was meeting up with a business professional in a coffee shop to teach them English for an hour. I had to market myself kind of in a freelance way. So I would even take the train an hour to teach English for an hour and then take the train back. And so that experience was really good for me in a way of I realized, I do value going to work for an allotted amount of time. Money was an issue, and it was hard to ride the train for an hour to make, 20 euros for an hour
Yeah.
and come back. And so I really do think I needed that experience to show me that I do like a 9 to 5. I do like a consistent schedule.
Okay.
And so, yeah, it was really hard, but ultimately set me up for then, okay, I'm now in Barcelona. It was hard for me to get like a social security number, hard for me to navigate kind of bureaucratic procedures, the visa. And so I then started to have empathy for international students coming to the US because I thought, we're not the most welcoming country, right?
Yeah.
And so I then thought, was a shift in my mind of what jobs are out there that could help with that. And so when I was in Barcelona, I started to apply for jobs in the US. And so ultimately, that is what I landed on, getting my job as an assistant international student advisor at Duke University.
Okay.
And so it was through that experience, I was in Barcelona for about 6 months, ultimately ran out of money. Um, but then knowing that, when I come back, I have this other journey to look forward to.
Yeah. Well, thank you for mentioning all of that.
Yeah,
Starting with your experience of realizing that what you studied in college, you realized that you didn't want to do that, long term.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's a realization that a lot of students come to when they leave college. Of course, you have your students that go in, they want to be a lawyer, and then they become lawyers, but that's not everybody's story. And so,
Absolutely.
yeah, listening to that was definitely motivating because you know, it explores how there's always other options as long as you find
Yeah,
your passion. And you were able to find
yeah.
that, overseas doing something that not a lot of people get to do.
Mhm.
Teaching English to students who don't know English. Because, here
Yeah,
growing up in America, you kind of just learn it. It's not really something that you really
yeah.
recall having lessons for. You have your English courses or whatever that teach you the grammatics, but it's kind of just
Mhm.
something that you naturally learn. But I'm sure that was an
Yeah,
adjustment for you, teaching it and learning how to teach it.
absolutely.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
Mhm. And so is there would you say that the students that you were teaching had some sort of impact on you? And if so, what was it?
Absolutely. One of the many like jobs that I worked there, I worked for a summer camp for a week. And so it was around 40 students in a classroom, that didn't have any AC, the windows wouldn't open.
Yeah.
Um, and I taught them English, but it was kind of like I was also teaching them about a subject matter. And so it was an 8th grade class. And so they were pretty advanced in their English
Okay.
because they had been learning it from a young age. And so I'll never forget, I was talking about different, like the history of the US. And so we were talking about slavery and just seeing, the impact that me teaching them about this very real and historic event that unfolded in the US and like how terrible it was. I showed them videos. Um, I showed them, we talked about, yeah, just how history was taught in the US as well. And just really seeing that kind of click for them. The US is a lot of times looked for, or looked at as like this place that students are, aspiring to go to. Everyone famous is out of the US, right?
Yeah.
And so just being very real about, what it's like being from the US and our history was really, that was a very impactful moment for me. And then just kind of realizing that people are just people all around the world, different languages, different maybe different cultural experiences growing up, but they're just people at the end of the day. And the connections I was able to make with them was something that I will carry on, and that has had a lasting impact on me. And so, yeah, that was definitely a great moment and a pivotal moment for me as well. And I knew, I think in that moment that I wanted to work with students.
Okay. So it was eye-opening for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so in doing my, research preparing for this interview,
Hmm.
I learned that one of the things that you focus on now as a graduate assistant, for the study abroad program,
Yeah.
you kind of, you focus on global engagement. And can you
Yeah.
explain if you were to give us a definition of what that is?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So global engagement, what we talk about in this M100 class that I talk about global engagement and cultural competency is different perspectives. And so we do this activity of, what's waking up on a Saturday look like to you? Do you wake up at 8 a.m.? Do you wake up to 2 p.m.? And so we have different students in the class, some wake up at 8 a.m. And then some wake up at 2 p.m., kind of slept in and spent your day well, kind of wasted it, right? So just doing those little exercises. And then another one we talk about in the beginning, talking about different perspectives is, what is a big high school to you? And so,
Mhm.
we have just talked about how small our high schools
Yeah,
were, but some students come from high schools that are around 4,000
yeah.
people. And so I think just getting them to realize that they are in class with different students. There's a lot of international students in their class. And so just that your perspective is formed by the perception and how you grew up and how you're raised. And that one way is not different or is not wrong or right, but it's just different. And it's different for other people based on how they were raised. And so I really I really enjoy like teaching that course because we do many different like etiquette mingling activities,
Mhm.
where we do an activity where you're handed a card and it would say like, talk to your neighbor and don't stop, even if they try to interrupt you. And so, that kind of shows um, as students go on to be, maybe in a business meeting. And so they're working with people from around the world. And so maybe you're wondering why your coworker is not speaking up, or your coworker is wondering why you keep talking over the CEO. It goes to show, maybe in different cultures, um, you know, for maybe like in many Asian cultures, they really respect a hierarchy of the way in the workplace. And so here in the US, it's much more of like a collaborative environment. And so a lot of times professors ask for feedback from students. So just, acknowledging that not one way is different than another, but it's just a different perspective. And so I think that answers your questions in kind of
Oh,
a
yeah.
roundabout way. But yeah, just relating to, and meeting students in your class.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. That's global engagement and cultural competency. Going back and reflecting on your experiences of studying in Spain and in Australia and
Mhm.
all the other places that you've, had the chance to visit, what are some things that you would tell yourself or, about studying abroad or that you wish you knew before you went and about studying abroad?
Yeah, this is a great question, because going into each experience, again, back to the idea of you don't know what you don't know. And I think just learning how to navigate it, what the growth that's had on me personally and professionally is like immense. And so every experience I've had looking back has been difficult. And maybe I would say, you should have got your passport sooner, or applied for your visa sooner, or done little things that maybe would have helped make my life a little bit easier. But I think, ultimately every experience that I've had has worked out. In a great way, not to say that they weren't hard, but I think just going in with that open mindset, and that's what I would, encourage for anyone studying abroad is it's okay to be scared, to be nervous and to be uncomfortable, but doing it anyways and just having an open mind and a positive attitude, I think just is important when you're going through these experiences.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, thank you for that. We're
Yeah.
almost through. We want to talk about a little bit of your future plans.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
what do you plan on doing within higher education administration after you graduate this May?
Yeah. Yeah, I love this question because, I think it just kind of speaks to my journey in general that my journey hasn't been the most narrow. And so I've kind of just pivoted, based on just kind of going after passions. And so what that looks like for me. And so currently, I'm in the field of higher education, international education right now. And that is something that I plan to continue with. For me, just, it is really important to support these areas of higher education, like rural students, transfer students, minoritized students, first gen students. And so I want to keep being in that space, giving students opportunities to go abroad and letting them know that it can be part of their story, even if they don't think it can be. And also, I interned with TRIO last semester. And so just really being in that space. So just a collaboration of the two, supporting, minoritized students, and then ultimately, helping them to get abroad, I think is really like where my passion is lying. Within like higher education.
Yeah. Okay. And how does your passion for first generation success kind of influence or determine your goals?
Yeah, I think just, being a first gen and kind of realizing the barriers that I had, is just really what kind of fires me up and gives me the passion to help students that I know are going through the same barriers. Because a lot of times, barriers are quick to change, or not quick to change in higher education, unfortunately. And so just really being in the space, where I am now, using kind of where I am now to help the students that are currently going through that, and letting them know, hey, I did this. This is what went well for me. This is what didn't. Talking them through loan options, how to get a passport, that kind of thing. Some of those things that maybe if you weren't first in, it's not really in the forefront of your mind. But that is where being a first gen kind of fires me up for the work that I'm doing. And I will continue, to be a voice for those first gen students as well.
Wow. And so speaking of being a voice for those first gen students, what are some things that you think universities could do to better support them?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this question as well. And we were just talking about this at the First Gen Summit last week. And I think, first and foremost, identifying first gen students. And I know that can be quite difficult. My experience and my story, I didn't know I was a first gen, and I think that I could have got connected with a lot more mentors that would ultimately have set me up differently, like financially. In different ways, with maybe realizing that I didn't love biology earlier. So I think identifying first gens, and, emails are just not cutting it.
Yeah.
As a first gen, it took me a few months to even navigate, the Google Suite, logging into my email, time management, like those skills were not skills that I had. So I think, not only identifying, but connecting with them. So having first gen mentors, at the First Gen Summit, we were talking about a first gen community center on campus, maybe to house a lot of those resources, but a physical place that students can go to just say, hey, excuse me, I'm feeling like super overwhelmed. I don't know how to navigate going to the health center. I don't know how to make an appointment. Those things that sometimes are often like forgotten about, or maybe people would think that everyone knows how to do that. But
Yeah.
those are things that I struggled with. So really having a physical place on campus to go, and then also connecting with mentors. So at the First Gen Summit, we talked about calling them champions, which I love that term. And so if you're an undergrad, pairing with a master's student, a grad student, to let them know that, hey, I'm here as a resource. But then also being a first gen graduate student, I went through undergrad, and I think a lot of people think that if you went through undergrad, then you're able to navigate grad school. But I was also faced with a lot of the same barriers, not knowing if I should take out a loan, not knowing, how to manage being a full-time student as well as working 20 and 29 hours. So having, a PhD student mentor or an alumni mentor, I think would have been really beneficial for me as well. So just having those first gen mentors, and really making that a consistent, streamlined process for entering college first gen students, I think would really help.
Yeah. I think those are three great points that you made, identifying them first, having a community center for them to go and have their questions answered, and then finally the mentorship that they would, that they could have possibly that they didn't have growing up. Now that they're in school, they have that mentorship. Those are great ideas. Definitely some things to think about too.
Yeah.
Rachel, we appreciate you coming on the show. This has been a lot of
It's been an
fun.
honor.
Yeah, this has been great conversation. I learned a lot about studying abroad and first generation success. This has been fantastic. And so we really thank you for your time. As tradition here at Beyond the Bell Tower, we don't just let you go that easy. We have to ask you these questions. The questions, they're called top takes. And there are 5 questions meant to kind of spur your mind a little bit and get you to think about, some of your personal preferences. And so if possible, just don't take too much time to think about them. Just say what comes to your head, if possible, of course.
Okay. Yeah,
All right.
for sure.
Okay, so the first question we ask will be the nicest place, scenery-wise, that you've traveled to outside of the United States is where?
I would have to say this past summer in Italy, I went to the Dolomites, and so it was a mountain range in Italy. It's next to the Swiss Alps. I might have to say I like, the Dolomites a little bit more. I think it was an amazing scenery. So yeah, in Italy. That's a good question.
Yeah, okay. Your favorite foreign food? What's your favorite foreign food?
Okay, that is also a great question. I love the food in Spain. I think, Spain was my first love. And so paella is like their traditional dish. It's seafood and rice, and it's amazing. They make it on a huge pot, and it's served like community style. So I'd have to say paella is amazing. And the original paella, there's different types, but it can actually be black. So it would be like seasoned with like squid ink, octopus ink. So interesting, but so delicious.
Yeah, I think a lot of the foreign foods are interesting, but you don't know what you're missing unless you try it. So thank you.
You don't know.
Okay, so you have 1 minute to save 3 items in your house, your apartment, your living space. You have 1 minute to save those 3 items. What 3 items would you prioritize?
Oh no, this one's difficult. So I'd say first and foremost my passport. That took a lot of work to get, and I do not want to go through the process of having to get a new one. First and foremost, my passport. This one's going to be funny and probably going to get a lot of pushback, but my Stanley, so I take this everywhere. My water bottle, I think they're really popular right now. So yeah, my Stanley, my passport. Let's see, what else am I taking? Probably just my laptop, so I can continue to travel the world. And I have my passport, I have water, I'm hydrated, and so continue working, traveling the world. I think those are the 3. That's a good question.
I like how they're all important to you. That's a good one. You can steal superpowers from one superhero. What would that power be?
Definitely. This one's easy for me because one I think about a lot, teleportation. So if I could snap my fingers and be anywhere around the world, that would be so amazing. A lot of times the journey is draining. So going to Australia is around a 22-hour flight. And so you lose, you lose a day. So it's kind of like time travel, but for example, the program I'm leading this summer, the students are departing May 15th, but they're arriving May 17th in Australia. So it is a full excursion. Teleportation, hands down, would be my go-to superpower.
All right, that's a good one. And then last question, what is your favorite quote and what does it mean to you?
Definitely. So I love this question. I have many favorite quotes, but on the theme of like studying abroad, I really love this one by Pat Conroy. So once you have traveled, the voyage never ends, but is played out over and over again in the quietest chambers. The mind can never break off from the journey. And I really just love that quote because it's so true. Once you travel once, it's you can't get enough. And so every summer, you know, I'm looking to meet new people, to have new experiences, because it's something that you keep thinking about, and ultimately it changes you for the better. And so that is a quote that I really love.
All right, that's a great one. Well, we thank you once again, Rachael, for coming on the show. Everyone, this is Rachael Mathis, class of NC State class of 2023,
Yep.
Higher
Yes,
Education Administration. So we wish you the best of luck going forward, Rachael. Thank you for coming. Thank you for tuning in, everyone. We hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time. Peace.
Thank you so much, Josh. Peace.